Hi, everyone. It's such an exciting night because in Philadelphia at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, former President Donald Trump will face off with current Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Frank Luntz is one of my favorite people to talk to about politics. He is a pollster. He has done thousands of focus groups with everyday Americans, and I thought he could give us a great preview about what we might expect tonight. Frank, before I get to the poll numbers and all those other things, by the way, welcome from West Point, where you're teaching tonight. So thank you for taking time out for us. Just what are you expecting?
A shit show. And I'm sure
Oh,
you I'm
gosh,
expecting,
Frank.
I know, but you'll have to just have to bleep it out. But there's no other word than that. And in fact, I got permission to use that word on several cable networks because that's what it is. In the end, you've got one candidate that has no respect for his opponent, no respect for decency or civility. And the other candidate, we really don't know enough about her, that she hasn't been so forthcoming with where she stands and what she thinks about various key policy issues. So I'm expecting tonight to be kind of awful. And I do believe it's going to determine the election. I think that tonight is everything for both candidates. And frankly, if Donald Trump actually had some semblance of discipline, he'd have the advantage. But he doesn't, and he hasn't shown it. And that's why I'm expecting Harris, the Vice President Harris, to be forthcoming where what she would do with immigration, what she would do with inflation, and most importantly, what her day one plan is, because she really didn't say so on the CNN interview. And I'm expecting fireworks, quite frankly. I think the two of them are going to go at each other because they don't like each other, they don't respect each other, and it's going to be a pretty tough night.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit more. Donald Trump actually seemed to exhibit a fair amount of discipline, even though there were many fabrications. I think 38 lies in all in his last debate performance with President Biden. Do you think he can marshal that kind of discipline? You said it's a big if. And certainly in recent weeks, he has not exhibited that on social media. So, what are the chances that he will actually, quote unquote, behave himself tonight, Frank?
I don't think the chances are great. And basically, it's the exact opposite advice for the two candidates. For Donald Trump, say less. For Kamala Harris, say more. For Trump, lay back. For Harris, lean in. And it's because they're in different stages of their campaign. They have different weaknesses. Both of them have the potential to be very strong tonight. With Harris, her advantage is her persona, is her ease and her youthfulness and her excitement and what she says, joy. Her disadvantage is that people have the right to know where she stands, and she has responsibility to tell them that. Doesn't have to be so detailed, but it does have to have some specifics. In Trump's case, he's got an argument to make for inflation. He's got an argument to make for immigration. The border was safer, inflation was lower, but voters don't like him. So he needs to actually hold back, which is not what Trump does. And she needs to lean forward, which is not what she does.
Well, let's talk about that some more. You said what she needs to do. Why do you think she hasn't yet or has not sufficiently defined herself and her policy positions up to this point? Why do you think her campaign isn't having her lean into policy? Do you think they're worried that by doing so will alienate some voters?
There's twofold. One is that she's been able to be multiple things to multiple people, which you only get one shot to do. The more specific you are, the more people you turn off. So the point that you raised is a good one. But the second one is that she says something that Trump can pounce on. And make no mistake, the Trump campaign this time is better than 2016 and better than 2020. The candidate is worse, but the campaign is better. And so she doesn't want to say anything wrong. And you know what? If you go from 4 points down to 3 points up in a matter of a couple of weeks, why change the strategy? However, tonight they're going to hold her feet to the fire. And tonight the accountability is much higher than it's been up to this point.
Why do you think the polls have tightened so much in the last New York Times Siena poll? It is neck and neck. I think Donald Trump is 1 point ahead of her, and many believe that his supporters are undercounted in polling situations. Why do you think it's tightened so much?
I don't think it's necessarily tightened because there are plenty of nationwide polls that show her up 3 points or 4 points. And the same thing had happened 8 weeks ago. There were some polls that still had Biden, at least dead even with Trump. In the end, I'll tell you what I do. I use the Real Clear Politics average. It's something that your viewers can go to. They can find it very easily. And they tend to throw out the most extreme polls for the Democrats, the most extreme polls for the Republicans. And the average turns out to be very close to where things are. She is beating Donald Trump on average by just over 1%. What does that mean? It's simply too close to call. The difference between now and 2016, because that's what I'm comparing this with, is that Trump is in a better position in 2016. His administration is actually receiving some fair and good marks for what it did. I remember how he left office. No one else seems to be focused on that. And Trump on the issues that matter is perceived to be better than Harris on the issues that matter.
Which are the economy and immigration?
And not the economy, and not even inflation. It's affordability. And it's food and fuel, housing and healthcare. These are things that everyone has to consume and that people remember how much they paid a few years ago, and they're comparing that with today. So, Katie, I will acknowledge that inflation is way, way down from what it was 18 months ago. That said, that's not how the average voter looks at it. They are making more money now than they ever have, but they're paying even higher prices than they ever have. And therefore, they have less money at the end of the week or less money at the end of the month. And in fact, paycheck to paycheck voters, to me, is the key swing voter. They don't like Trump as a person, but they think he'll be better for their pocketbooks. They do like Harris, and they're curious about her, but they question where she stands on some of the issues.
Let me ask you what you said briefly a moment ago, that people don't remember the way Donald Trump left office. Why isn't January 6th looming larger in the minds of voters this go round? And the fact that despite all evidence to the contrary, Donald Trump continues to insist the election was rigged.
Well, because the guy was shot, was it 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago? And the public has forgotten that. We have such short memories. We're willing to blot out the things that we don't like. And we're more focused now on day-to-day quality of life because it is a struggle. And if you ask people what's more important to them, getting by, making ends meet, providing for their families, or the political events of January 6th, it's overwhelming. And in fact, we've looked at that. Inflation is more than 2.5 times more important to the public. Immigration is 2.3 times more important to the public than January 6th. You and I may, because of our positions, because of our education, because of our responsibilities, we may focus on January 6th, but the average American is worried about putting food on the table, and that supersedes anything about politics or about what happened that day.
I know that you have said previously, Frank, that Kamala Harris should focus on the chaos of the Trump administration during the course of this debate. How does she effectively do that? And why do you think that's a good strategy?
Well, because the public doesn't want to go back. And there's a battle right now over who's the candidate of the past versus who's the candidate of the future. It is not clear cut on that because the Biden-Harris administration is the administration in power right now. In terms of importance, and that's what I'm always trying to measure is priorities. Their voters, the last undecided voters, only 5% of them, and they only exist in 7 states that really matter. So you realize that we're about to spend $2 billion on less than 1% of the vote. And in states where the winner is probably going to win by 1%, 2%, maybe even less, that every advantage is essential for the candidates. And every opportunity they have to draw a negative contrast with their opponents, they're going to seize that opportunity. I really believe that quality of life, not standard of living, but quality of life is more important now than it was in 2020. And that voters have forgotten some of the worst elements that they didn't like about Donald Trump, although he seems to find it necessary to remind them every time he speaks. So
are you saying Kamala Harris should remind them of what it was like when Donald Trump was president?
absolutely. And she can do so because he's made it an issue. The way that he attacks her ethnicity, the size of her rallies, it's absurd to me. If he challenges her on immigration, if he challenges her on the border, if he challenges her on the prices of food and fuel and housing and healthcare, that's where he's strongest. Instead, he's challenging her on things that nobody cares about, or even worse yet, they are offended by what he says. And I don't think he has the ability, frankly, to be disciplined. And I don't think he has the ability to even hear criticism. And that's why I'm not expecting him. I'll be the first to acknowledge, and you'll follow me on Twitter or X, and you'll see as the debate goes on. If he wins, I'll acknowledge it. I don't have an issue with that. But I think he's going to lose because he's incapable. And I'm going to give you the two lines. In her case, she needs to say to him, for every woman, for every mom, for every daughter, for every granddaughter, for every wife, show us respect, show us dignity, treat us the way you would treat your own mom and your own daughter, and stop yelling at us. That's what she should do, because that'll galvanize the female vote. And for Trump, all he has to do with her is to interrupt, and she can say, excuse me, I'm speaking, I'm talking. And his response to that is, yes, you're talking. And that's the problem. You're talking, and America wants you doing. That's his best attack against her.
She has been asked about her changing views. And, I think if I were her, I would say, well, your vice presidential candidate said that you were the equivalent of Hitler and all kinds of things about you in 2016. Nonetheless, she has been challenged about her changing views on a number of issues. And according to a lot of conservative media outlets, they are going to try to paint her as a left-wing radical. How does she deal with the fact that she has changed on a few issues without looking like a flip-flopper or somebody who is just trying to win an election?
She has to draw, it's a very good question, and she has to draw the contrast. Who do you want? Someone who holds the same views today as they did 20 years ago. Someone who sees life and experiences life and holds a number of different positions and still will not change where they stand on policy. Do you want someone who does that? Or do you want someone who learns, someone who grows, someone who takes in information and makes judgment, not on ideological reasons, but on common sense reasons? In fact, the language for her is reasonable, sensible, and responsible. But Katie, I don't hear her using those words either. So I look at both these candidates. To me, it's so easy, and yet it seems so difficult for them.
I wanted to ask you about your assertion that this debate is really, really important, because I know some people have said they were going to base their vote on what they heard tonight. On the other hand, I know that according to a poll, only 29% of adults said that debates between political candidates are rarely, if ever, based on facts. And today, 40% of American adults believe that debates between political candidates are rarely, if ever, based on facts. Given that increased number, Frank, will that many people be basing their votes on a process that they don't even think is the truth?
Because they're not voting on facts. They're not voting on policy. They're voting on the candidate that they think understands them, the candidate that empathizes with them, the candidate that has their back. It's why Harris repeatedly says, I'm fighting for you. She's trying to show not the policy of what she's doing, but the attribute of fighting. And Donald Trump has the same objective. He even uses some of the same language. In the end, the undecided voters, obviously, there's a huge dichotomy. I'm looking at my camera to make sure that the hands stay in the frame. They are this far apart. And so there should be no question about whether you're voting for Harris or Trump. But these final undecided voters don't vote on policy. They vote on character traits and attributes and what the candidates are like and whether or not they feel comfortable with them and whether or not they think that they're understood and appreciated. The reason why Trump won in 2016 is not because of his policies. It's because a whole lot of Americans felt ignored, forgotten, even betrayed. And those people still exist in 2024. It's a different group of people in 2024. And if I can just specify them, union members who don't support their leadership and are making a decision that's going against their leadership, particularly in the trades, in the professions where they work with their hands. There will be a higher Trump vote among those people than any Republican candidate with unions. Second, Latino votes. And I know this sounds crazy because of what he said about some people coming across the border, but they're just as angry with Democrats for ignoring them or betraying them as they are with Trump for his comments. And they matter in states like Nevada and Arizona. And lastly, are younger African-American men, not the women. The women are so solidly in her camp that she's probably going to get 97% of women of color. Trump is drawing among African-American men, younger ones, and Latino men in surprising numbers. Maybe a third of Black men are considering him and 40% of Latino men. And that's
Can you
changing.
explain that, Frank? Can you explain that?
Yes, it's because they feel like they've been screwed. And they see Trump as fighting the system. They see the system as coming down on Trump just like it comes down on them. And they're tired of it. And they want to speak up and they want to speak out. And that's exactly what they're doing. Now, she's doing especially well among suburban women. I think she's going to do even better than Hillary Clinton did, than even Joe Biden did among suburban women.
Well, Hillary Clinton did not win white women, by the way, Frank. We should
Right.
remind people that.
Right, but she did particularly badly in exurbs. She did particularly badly in rural communities. I'm now speaking of the suburbs where she absolutely did win. Places like outside Philadelphia, outside Pittsburgh, the suburbs of Detroit, the suburbs of Madison and Milwaukee. States that Trump eventually won. He won because of the exurbs and further out in the rural communities. They came out and voted in record numbers back in 2016. And Biden won a lot, did even better than she did among that group in 2020. I think Harris is going to be the best of the three. And that if she wins, that would be the reason why she wins. Suburban women, upper middle class women, college graduates with jobs and kids. And they've had enough. It's not that they're necessarily voting for her. They're simply voting against Trump. And younger women are absolutely voting for Harris. So you got this balance. You got this voter shift. So Trump's got some good news and Harris has got some good news.
I want to go back to something you said quickly about character, that many people vote on the character, who they think cares about them. And if you're talking about character, I'm curious how Donald Trump's legal travails have impacted the perception that he is a person of character. After all, he is a convicted felon. So I guess the question is, how do people rationalize believing that he is someone of greater character given his legal track record?
I'm using character in the broadest term, character traits. I've shortcut it by just calling it character. It's not that they find him more honest than her or that they trust him more than her, because they don't. It's the attributes that he brings to the office in addition to this, which is an uncompromising willingness to stand up to the media, which is now having the lowest credibility numbers they've ever had in modern politics. The willingness to speak truth to CEOs and business leaders who are not held in particularly high regard right now. Those character traits have allowed him to survive what would have destroyed any other candidate. And the last thing about this is the way that the Democrats handled this and the Biden administration, they turned Donald Trump into a victim. You don't indict someone and then wait 4 days or 5 days to release the indictment. That allowed Trump to redefine all of these cases and to say to his supporters and to others that he's being prosecuted and persecuted. Donald Trump is the best victim politician I have ever seen in my professional life. And actually, with each indictment, in some cases, his polling numbers actually went up.
You recently spoke with 15 undecided voters, Frank, between the ages of 18 and 27 for part of the piece you did for the New York Times. What did you learn from these younger voters that surprised you the most?
I'm not sure it surprised me, but it's very clear to them. And it's similar to what I've been analyzing with you now. They really don't like Donald Trump, but Harris hasn't told them enough to make them support her. They don't want to go back to the period when they were younger and all the chaos and all the disruption. In fact, that's where I came up with this theory about chaos was from those voters. But as much as they don't love Trump, they're not going to vote for someone they don't know. They're not going to vote for someone who is not forthcoming. And it was okay for Harris to not do these interviews up to a point. Starting tonight, she's going to have to answer a lot of questions to win them over. To be
Do you
clear,
think she'll need to do more interviews after this debate as well?
absolutely, because the debate will raise a lot of questions, not just answer them. I think that she has the advantage right now. If you ask me to bet on the election, I'd say she wins, but I wouldn't put any money on it because it's way too close to call. He has the ability to win the election back. She has the ability to put it out of Trump's reach. It depends on whether both candidates are humble enough to hear what voters are saying about them and address those concerns. I'm not sure they are, but that's why tonight is so important.
In closing, I want you to finish the sentence. Tonight, the debate will be a victory for Donald Trump if
he keeps his cool, focuses on policies, doesn't personally insult the vice president, but does challenge her record because it's not a strong record on the issues that matter, particularly inflation and immigration.
Vice President Kamala Harris will have a victory in the debate tonight if she
talks about and addresses with some detail exactly what she will do on day 1, day 100, and day 1000. And she challenges Trump to treat women with decency, civility, and respect, the respect that they deserve, that they've earned and deserve.
Having said that, the gender gap is already, what, 13 points or more, Frank?
I think there are going to be more divorces because of this election than ever before. And if I don't run momentarily, I will be divorced from West Point because I need to teach tonight.
All right. Well, Frank, thank you so much for your time. I'll be following you on X to get your feedback as I watch the debate. And we'll see if it really is a shit show as you predicted.
Well, let us hope that I'm wrong on that prediction.
I hope so, because I hope it's an opportunity for the American people to learn something about both candidates because it's such an important election. Frank, thank you. Great to see you as always.
Cheers.